gang, this week's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Hey, LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates that you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free now at linkedin.com/goodseats. That's linkedin.com/goodseats to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And now, here's our show.
The winter of 1981-82 could be characterized in one word for the city of Pittsburgh: rebirth. As Renaissance 2 saw new skyscrapers pushing their way up in the downtown area, another rebirth was taking place. This rebirth was in the Civic Arena, where the Pittsburgh Spirit returned to the city of Pittsburgh, bringing major indoor soccer league action back with them. The Spirit had been forced to sit out the prior season, but Edward J. DeBartolo purchased the team over the summer, giving Pittsburghers the opportunity to once again enjoy professional indoor soccer. A newcomer to the professional sports scene in the United States, the Major Indoor Soccer League attracted over 2 million fans in this, its fourth year of existence. 152,000 fans poured through the turnstiles at the Civic Arena, including the record crowd of 10,366 on March 3rd to see the three-time champion New York Arrows. Virtually an expansion team, the Spirit would go on to open the eyes of everyone around the MISL, proving that a first-year team could be a winner. In the process, word of their exploits spread throughout the Pittsburgh area. Soccer gained new fans, and a sports team had won the hearts of a city. John Kowalski was named head coach, and he and general manager Chris Wright had to put a team together from scratch.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, hello. That's your pal Tim here. How you doing? It's Good Seats Still Available. No, it's not the Larry King Show. But no, we appreciate your finding us. And of course, this is the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. That's what we like to do here at Good Seats Still Available. My name is Tim Hanlon, and I appreciate your finding us, downloading us, putting us in your earbuds, ingesting us. However, this week, thanks for coming by. And we are going to just slightly, ever so slightly, adjust our GPS coordinates from last week's place of domicile, the great city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We're going a little westward to the Keystone's sister city, I guess, perhaps rival city for sure, Pittsburgh, PA. And we are going to get into yet another memorable location of yore where sports and lots of other stuff. Memories just flood on in. And of course, it's the old Civic Arena, later known as the Mellon Arena, but also fondly, perhaps more fondly, remembered as the Igloo in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The clip there at the beginning, just one of the many franchises that took place in the great city of Pittsburgh at the old Civic Arena, the Igloo. And you want, of course, remember the great Pittsburgh Spirit as part of that, the MISL's Pittsburgh Spirit, interesting story in and of itself. And that clip from their, well, not really their first season. It was actually their second season, non-consecutive that. Remember, the Pittsburgh Spirit began their lives in the Igloo in the premier initial debut season of the Major Indoor Soccer League, 1978 to 79. That first season. Then they took what they called a hiatus. Certainly something, a term that I don't think any other pro sports league really kind of utilized. And if they did, it really wasn't as oft used as it was in the realm of soccer. The NASL, the ASL, and certainly the MISL certainly used this, this term, hiatus, and the Pittsburgh Spirit took advantage of it after that first season. They came back in 1981-82 and had some really great years in those early 80s at the Igloo, as we'll hear in our conversation with our guest this week, Dave Finoli. You'll understand that the Spirit, on more than a few occasions, were regularly outdrawing the Pittsburgh Penguins, the more hallowed member of the Pittsburgh Civic Arena tenantry, if you will, if that's a word. Because the early 80s, the Pittsburgh Penguins were not so great, and the Spirit were better than average on an occasion, really good. And that clip featuring the dulcet tones of a one J.P. Della Camera, our episode number 66 guest, then known as John Paul Della Camera. So with the narration, he was kind of the voice for a bunch of years of the Pittsburgh Spirit, and he was the voice of that really interesting 16 millimeter maybe film commemorating the 1981-82 version of the Pittsburgh Spirit. It's a highlight film. It's on YouTube. It's great in its basicness, but it was clearly a fun year for sure, the Pittsburgh Spirit's history, and it's just a taste of what was to come in the next year or two for that franchise. And frankly, again, just one of the great stories that we're going to get into about this, this Civic Arena in Pittsburgh, an architectural wonder for sure. They had this sort of steel retractable roof, if you can imagine, built in, or actually came to fruition in 1961, was then known as the Civic Auditorium. It actually predated its use for sports. It was actually kind of created for use for music. The Metropolitan Opera and Symphony, I believe, was sort of all part of that. Later known as the Mellon Arena, but then it became known as the Civic Arena in the 60s, especially as pro sports took a liking to it. Not just pro sports, also college basketball for sure with Duquesne and some other stuff. But in 1961, perhaps not sort of on the radar of the builders of this arena, the Pittsburgh Wrens of the American Basketball League, a topic we've talked about, the ABL lasting a season and a half, with the great Connie Hawkins, the Pittsburgh Hornets of the American Hockey League, minor league. The opera, of course, was part of the usage and arguably the original usage. But then we get into some really interesting use cases. Again, the Duquesne Dukes of the NCAA basketball thing, for sure. But then we get into some fascinating usage, and we're going to get into all of that with our conversations with the great Dave Finoli, who is the editor of a fantastic book called, well, I want to sure get the official title correct here. It's called Pittsburgh's Civic Arena, Stories from the Igloo. And it's got just chock full of great stories from those teams and more, such as the Pittsburgh Pipers, and then later the Pittsburgh Condors, both of the ABA, American Basketball Association. Interesting stories there. Certainly the Penguins, arguably the most recognizable and stable of all franchises, obviously still going very strong. Thank you very much. Just across the way in their more modern arena. But of course, they called the Igloo home for sure. The Pittsburgh Triangles of World Team Tennis. Remember them? The 1975 champion World Team Tennis team. They were the Pittsburgh Triangles. We get into that. The Spirit, the aforementioned Major Indoor Soccer League, Pittsburgh Spirit, but also later on the Pittsburgh Stingers of the CISL were indoor soccer inhabitants of the Igloo. The Pittsburgh Gladiators of the Arena Football League. They were, if you don't remember, one of the first 4 franchises in AFL history. As a matter of fact, little known tidbit, if you remember some of our previous conversations about the AFL, or the Arena Football League, really, it was actually the first ever regular season game played there, Pittsburgh Gladiators, in 1987. The Pittsburgh Bulls of the Major Indoor Lacrosse League. Remember them? the early 1990s there too. The RHI, the Roller Hockey International, had a team in the Igloo for the summer of 1994, the Pittsburgh Phantoms. And, of course, even the Pittsburgh Crossfire of the then renamed National Lacrosse League in 2000. And even, yes, the very minor league at that time, Pittsburgh Explosion of the ABA in the latter part of the arena's life, 2005, 2006. All of those teams and various other situations, yes, looking at you, the 1976 fans, if you will, of the fish that saved Pittsburgh. Yes, the Igloo played a part in that too. We're going to get into all of that stuff and more with our guest this week, Dave Finoli, as we talk about the Igloo, right? The Civic Arena, later known as the Mellon Arena of Pittsburgh, a memorable place for great sports memories, and you will enjoy this conversation for sure coming up in just a few moments' time. We look forward to sharing it with you. Before we do so, we want to remind you that our pals at oldschoolshirts.com are ready, willing, and able to serve your holiday gift-giving needs. Promo code for you there at oldschoolshirts.com is Good Seats. Good Seats is the promo code, 10% off all of your purchases. And why do we highlight them this week? Oldschoolshirts.com. Well, if you want to talk about just about every team that inhabited the Igloo, the Civic Arena of Pittsburgh, well, you've come to the right place at oldschoolshirts.com. How about some great Pipers shirts? A couple of those for you there. Condors shirts there for you. 2 shirts even devoted to the actual Igloo itself. There's a great yellow one called, it says the Big Igloo on it. And then there's another one that's got the actual dates, a black shirt with so actually it's a white shirt. I'm sorry. It's a white shirt with sort of a black sort of imagery there called the Igloo Civic Arena with the dates on it and stuff. Just amazingly great stuff all around the history of Pittsburgh, not just sports, but all kinds of other things. If you want a Pittsburgh Gladiators shirt, remember them, the one-year wonder that were in the USFL? Not many remember them, and perhaps maybe for a good reason. But the Pittsburgh Triangles, a great shirt there. Pittsburgh Stingers, the aforementioned CISL team. The Pittsburgh Spirit are commemorated in a great shirt. And on and on and on. There's radio stations from Pittsburgh's past there. Just all kinds of great stuff. And again, just a real sampling, frankly, of all the great stuff you will find at oldschoolshirts.com in the domain of sports, in the domain of pop culture and media and restaurants and bars and all kinds of fun stuff. You know it, you love it. You can't live without it. There's new stuff all the time. New old stuff, if you will, at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS, 10% off all of your purchases. Visit them early and often, and what better place you will not find, I guess, for great holiday gifts, appropriately priced, and just wonderful memories for fans of sports and pop culture. Just about every city and region in the country, you will love it. Thank you to our pal P.F. Wilson and his team for sponsoring our show, as always. And we look forward to more great stuff in the new year with our pals at oldschoolshirts.com. All right, let's get into our discussion, our fascinating, intriguing dialogue, shall we say, about the Civic Arena, the Igloo, Pittsburgh's indoor wonderland, shall we say, of sports. Here it comes. Here's our conversation with Dave Finoli we had just a couple of days back. Please, as always, sit back and enjoy.
I am an author. I'm a lifelong Pittsburgh sports fan. Grew up about a half hour outside the city. And, I've lived and died with these teams throughout my life. I was a journalism student and graduated with a degree at Duquesne University, which is in downtown Pittsburgh. And really I went into retail after that. Didn't do anything till about 2000. was pretty much coming up on my 40th birthday, very frustrated of not ever doing anything with writing. I certainly loved writing. And my wife basically told me, since I had this idea for a manuscript on baseball during World War II, which actually was my only non-Pittsburgh book I did, was my first one. It was called For the Good of the Country, and she told me either submit an idea or just let it go and quit wishing without doing anything, in essence. So kind of pushed me to send the idea to McFarland Publishers. And I was lucky enough that they were looking for such a title at the same time on baseball in World War II. And that was my first book. And I am currently working on book number 36.
Well, one of the more recent ones came out just about a month or so ago, caught my eye. And it's interesting that we're recording this the week we actually dropped our episode on the Spectrum in Philadelphia. Lou Scheinfeld, one of the sort of chief architects, if you will, in terms of getting sort of the publicity and the teams and all that kind of stuff around that iconic arena. But one just looks further westward in the Keystone State and finds that, frankly, this Civic Arena probably even richer in terms of history, and certainly I think even maybe twice the amount of teams, both currently and around it, but also sort of long departed. Give me a sense of like how the Civic Arena sort of hits your radar versus, say, I don't know, the 100th book on the Pirates or maybe the second book on the Spirit, if you're looking at Pittsburgh sports.
Well, the Civic Arena was such a unique entity. It called the Igloo because it basically looked like an igloo, and it was the first retractable roof in a major sports venue, I believe, in the country. It was built in 1961 for the purpose of having a place that the Pittsburgh Opera or orchestra could play. And it did have the intent of having sports. Mainly at the time was the Pittsburgh Hornets, which were our American Hockey League team back then. This was before the Flyers and the Penguins became part of the NHL in 1967. They actually had a shot at an NBA team and were awarded a franchise. But the NBA was not really a huge moneymaker at the time. And the guy, John Harris, who had been the guy who he didn't, I guess, booked all the events at the Duquesne Gardens, which was the previous indoor arena, and he owned the Hornets. He was given an NBA franchise. Got angry because Bill Sharman, he wanted to hire from the Boston Celtics, the great LA Lakers coach. Got mad when the Celtics reneged on their agreement to let him sign as a coach of the new Pittsburgh franchise. So he decided he didn't want the team. So he pulled back his bid to have an NBA team. And there was a gentleman who had a team in the American Basketball League, which was a very short run league in the early 60s. And he had a chance to get the NBA team, but decided to keep his ABL team, thinking they had a better chance to compete. Probably one of the more short-sighted decisions in professional sports history. But I'm not sure that the Penguins would have been a survivor had the NBA come here and succeeded. In fact, the Pittsburgh Pipers were the first American Basketball Association champion at the Civic Arena. They were getting a lot of the fans were warming up to them as the season went on, almost sold out the last game of the ABA championship. And they were pulled from Pittsburgh because the commissioner, George Mikan, had to have wanted to live in Minneapolis, and the commissioner had I guess, basically have the offices where they had a team. So they pulled the Pipers to Minnesota, bringing them back a year later, of course, nowhere near as good as they were, and ended up being the Pittsburgh Condors, one of the biggest jokes in professional sports history. But had the Pipers stayed here and succeeded, and with the fan base they were growing, I really believe the Penguins would never have survived in Pittsburgh, because there were several times in the 70s, including a time the Civic Arena was padlocked, that they were in such financial trouble that it was tough to see them going on. I think if the Pipers had been here and succeeded, they wouldn't have made it more than 5 or 6 years.
Well, I think most modern day fans, right, probably look at the Igloo, especially, those who grew up in Pittsburgh and sort of lived sports through the years, both outdoor and indoor, probably would most naturally associate the history of the Igloo with that of the Penguins. But I think it's also harder to kind of remember that, the Penguins didn't even come into the picture for this arena until 6 years after it made its debut. So I think people erroneously think that they were symbiotic or they were considered simultaneously, and they weren't, right? Because it was at least 6 years difference.
Absolutely not. And as I tell my children now, they're the generation growing up with the Pirates being bad. My father grew up, the Steelers were the embarrassment of the NFL before 1972. When we grew up, the Penguins were the embarrassment of the city. When I went to Duquesne, I started in 1979. We would pay $5 to sit at the top of the Igloo, and by the end of the first period, we were on the glass on the rink because there was nobody in the stadium. I mean, the Penguins were by far not the main component there. In fact, there was a major indoor soccer league team called the Pittsburgh Spirit that really, there was actually a time that the ownership group who owned both teams wondered whether they should just keep the Spirit and get rid of the Penguins. I mean, it was an embarrassment until they tanked in 1983, which we have a story on that in the book, and then drafted Mario Lemieux. And ever since then, it's been the model franchise in the NHL. And for the most part of the last 40 years, I mean, 5 Stanley Cups and certainly is, I would think, if they rival the Steelers as far as the most popular team in the city.
So, all right, before we sort of get into some of the interesting anecdotes and sort of stops along the way, the Penguins obviously a disproportionate share for sure. Let's back up for a second and talk to, you sort of hinted at sort of the structure of this thing, but it's fascinating to me to realize that this was the first true stadium of its kind, arena of its kind, sporting endeavor of its kind to have a retractable roof. And I guess for whatever reason, I never really kind of sort of grasped this concept that this arena, back dating in 1961 and onward, was truly sort of an indoor but also potentially outdoor facility.
It was pretty neat. I mean, the last 20 so years that it was there, they had issues with it, and it really never opened at the end. But I remember seeing a Monkees concert there. I'm embarrassed to say that, but I saw a Monkees concert there with the arena open. I saw Pittsburgh Triangles, who were the 1975 World Team Tennis champions, a very popular team at the time. They would open it, and it was pretty cool to see a game indoors with the city skyline behind you.
What was the reason? I mean, how did they determine when to open the facility? I mean, was it truly weather based? I mean, were there basketball games or even hockey games played with the roof open at some point? Or I'm just curious as to sort of what sort of was the rationale that made the decision to open or close it, or what?
I don't really think they opened it often. They opened it during an arena football game The Pittsburgh Gladiators played the first arena football game ever there, and there's a great story in the book about how the coach ended up ripping apart the author of the book, who was Tom Rooney, part of the Steeler Rooney family. He was the head of the Civic Arena at the time, and he opened it for the arena football game, and the coach did not like it. He thought it took out the crowd with the arena open. Plus, I mean, you did have wind and such aspects with that. So they really didn't open it often. It was mostly a concert. The World Team Tennis, as I said, used it. I don't remember. There may have been a basketball game, but there's none that I remember it being open for, and certainly no hockey games that it was open for. But it was weather-based, and as I said, they used it probably mostly for concerts. But it was just a real neat thing seeing that, seeing the arena open and seeing the city skyline with it.
Well, I guess part of it, too, is also structurally, it allowed for unimpeded views from wherever you sat, right? Because it was, I'm not an engineer by trade, right? But it was structurally enabled by this sort of roof-type structure that was, yeah.
It was at first. Now, the arena started out about a 12,000 person capacity when in the 70s, when we were growing up with the Penguins, it was a little over 13. And then they started stuffing seats in every nook and cranny. They built 2 upper decks, then they built upper decks on top of the upper decks. And there were just places in the arena that you just didn't want to sit because your knees would be in your throat. It's certainly in various parts, it was very comfortable, but in various parts it was nowhere near the modern stadium experience. The upper deck that they built last, I want to say they were in the mid 17,000s by that point. You were at such an angle that you were afraid to stand up. So it was kind of it was not the most comfortable place in the world. I will tell you that by the end. But I mean, to me, a stadium, we did a book on Three Rivers Stadium the year before to celebrate the 50th anniversary of its building. This is celebrating the Civic Arena's 60th anniversary this year of its building. And the Three Rivers Stadium was like Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. It was a cookie cutter. I mean, for baseball, it was not very fun to watch a game in, but you know what? Stadiums are about the memories that are made inside of them. And that's a great thing about the Civic Arena. There was just so many different aspects of different sports, great concerts. I mean, the Beatles went there. Elvis was there. Elvis sang his last, I guess he had a traditional New Year's Eve concert, and he had his last New Year's Eve concert before he died at the Civic Arena. So, I mean, that's what just makes this book so fascinating. There's so many different angles: boxing, basketball, hockey. The Soviets came to the arena to play the Penguins, which, they did several places. But we have a good article in there about a good chapter in there about that. And it just, that's why you love old stadiums. It's not that they were necessarily comfortable. It's not that they were necessarily gave you all the amenities. But man, the memories you have in there, the memories you have with your friends, the memories you have with your children, with your wife. I mean, they're just priceless.
Well, basketball. Let's start with basketball because, frankly, that was kind of the first. Aside from the ice capades, right, which was sort of I guess a test of the rink. But between the Hornets of the AHL and the Pittsburgh Wrens, right, with Connie Hawkins, right, yeah. and the ABL, which we've talked about in a number of different episodes here. Pittsburgh was very much, I think, to most people's surprise today, a basketball town. Certainly at the collegiate level, and you'd think that the Wrens would have had a more than fair shot at establishing some kind of solidity there in Pittsburgh.
Sure, I mean Duquesne University was in a level of an Alabama in football during the 1950s and early 60s. They won the NIT in '55, which the NIT at the time was as important as the NCAA tournament because they had the flexibility of inviting second and third teams from a conference, and most of the independents, which were about 40% of basketball at the time, went there. So it had a good groundwork with college basketball. And Connie Hawkins, of course, was banned from the NBA, banned from college basketball at the time for supposed dealings he had with a gambler before he went to the University of Iowa, which ended up being nothing, as he ended up suing. But the Pittsburgh Wrens were the people that gave him an opportunity to play when nobody else would. And you're right. I mean, you could have had a good background with him, and he rewarded them with an MVP performance in their one season, but they just couldn't draw. I mean, the league was not popular. The professional game at that point was not popular. And the city was basically Duquesne was the top dog in the city, and would eventually play their games in the arena. They were playing at the Fitzgerald Fieldhouse on the University of Pittsburgh at the time after the Duquesne Gardens closed. So they didn't come for a few years to the Civic Arena, but they ended up staying there till they built their own place in 1988. But the ABL just never took hold and was done after a year and a half.
It's also very interesting. I mean, essentially, the arena really, aside from the Wrens, their 1 year, and the Hornets, right, which is, pretty top tier minor league hockey, right, was really a collegiate sports, Duquesne in particular, hoops, and the opera, right? I mean, it was really, let's put it this way, for an arena with such a modern take with a retractable roof and all, and 12,000+ seats, at least at the time. You wonder if it was being maybe underutilized because of its, shall we say, minor league sports and only collegiate sort of status, right? No pro basketball team, no pro hockey team at the time.
No, it was. I mean, the city did love their Hornets, and as I did the research on it, I mean, the Hornets, in their last game, they didn't know whether they were going to be moved or just terminated, which ended up just being terminated. But their last game was at the arena, and they win the Calder Cup, which is the Stanley Cup of the AHL, and they won the Calder Cup in the last game at the arena in overtime, in a just extremely exciting game. And there were fans that actually were trying to stop the NHL from coming here because they love the Hornets so much. Again, the NHL at the time, not a huge popular sport around the country. So, but yeah, no, it was underutilized. It was basically concerts and the Hornets really until Duquesne came in, and then eventually the Dapper Dan Roundball Classic, which was one of the premier, if not the premier, college or high school basketball game in the country.
So 67, do you think it was the Penguins or the Pipers that kind of sort of lit the match, so to speak, for Pittsburgh to become sort of an indoor professional sports mecca? I get the sense that the Penguins were obviously they were part of the NHL Great Expansion, right? This is a league that was for decades, only 6 teams, right? And automatically it was going to double in size. Who sort of found who first, right? It would seem to me that Pittsburgh would, getting a hint that the NHL was looking to expand, said, hey, we've got basically a fairly new and modern facility ready to go. I got to think that alone made Pittsburgh one of the top franchise locations on the list for the NHL because of that.
Well, they actually almost didn't get a franchise. It was thought that the NHL governors were favoring Buffalo as the 6th team. And it was Art Rooney who went in there and kind of twisted the arms of some of the owners who he had dealings with to come back and pull in Pittsburgh. So the Penguins almost didn't happen at that point. But once Art Rooney stepped in and took care of that for the city, they were there. People for the most part were excited. As I said, there was a group that really wanted to keep the Hornets, but for the most part, it was accepted well. And they were probably more of a feature than the Pipers, who came that same year. But I'm telling you, at the end, once Connie Hawkins, and it turned out to be a great team. They won an exciting 7-game series against the New Orleans Buccaneers in the ABA Finals, who had great coaches in Larry Brown and Doug Moe as players on that team. And Connie Hawkins, he became a legend at that point. He tears his knee, puts a big brace on it, doesn't play Game 5, they lose. They're down 3-2, comes back and just has a game for the ages and a knee brace in Game 6, and then the Civic Arena is pretty much full in Game 7. And I really, really genuinely believe it would have been the Pipers that were the team that stayed. And if they stayed together like that, I don't see why the NBA would have made them part of the combination that eventually happened with them. So I think the Penguins were very lucky that the ABA screwed up and pulled that team to Minnesota and then let it fall apart. Because I really do think it would have been the Pipers that would have been leading the way in this city as far as making it a special town. That's
interesting. Why? Because they were so good out of the gate, and you had the sort of the return, if you will, of already a legend in the town in with his previous exploits in Connie Hawkins.
Absolutely. I mean, Connie Hawkins played 2 seasons in Pittsburgh. He was an MVP for 2 seasons, and I mean, even though he's a New York native and only played 2 seasons here, I mean, the city celebrated him till not in the recent past when they had a Connie Hawkins League, which was a premier college league in the city during the summer. So Connie Hawkins was very much celebrated, even as much as a few years ago in the city. So, yeah, I think he would have been the Mario Lemieux of his time had he been able to stay and just keep that going.
So we had the late, great Dennis Murphy on this show a couple of times, and obviously just an inveterate entrepreneur in the realm of sports, starting with, of course, the ABA. I would have loved to have asked him this question. Obviously, we lost him earlier this year, but around sort of how Pittsburgh, we certainly learned from him. It really didn't take much to get a team or a city sort of circled on his must fly to and pitch parchment there, right? But I got to think that when the NHL announced Pittsburgh as an expansion franchise, that set in motion maybe more of a sense of urgency to domicile an ABA initial franchise in Pittsburgh, perhaps maybe sooner perhaps than maybe was originally envisioned for the ABA, or maybe wasn't even on their radar. I'm just sensing that the NHL move probably put Pittsburgh on the basketball map a little bit quicker for him and his colleagues.
It's quite possible. I mean, to know you're in the NHL, I mean, that was quite a feather in the hat of the city. I mean, at the time, you had the Pirates and Steelers, and the Steelers, as I said, until 1972, they were the embarrassment of the NHL or NFL for most of their 40 years. So to get another feather in the hat of the city, I'm sure that was important. And again, the Civic Arena at the time was state of the art compared to most of the other arenas that you would see around. So I think that was quite a drawing card to both leagues, that they could move into such a modern facility at the time.
From what you can glean from the contributions to the book, what was sort of that first year, I guess, of Piper basketball and Penguins hockey? Because here you are, a city of certainly with baseball and with football for some time, but frankly, going from really, minor league this and non-existent basketball that to 2 pro teams in the arena overnight, seemingly. I mean, you're kind of hinting that Pittsburgh Pipers basketball was a little bit more of a draw than hockey, but I got to think that even both of them probably did well at the gate, at least to begin with, because of the curiosity factor.
The Pipers actually didn't. They as the season went on, they started catching hold of the city from a popularity standpoint. Pittsburgh was consistent. The Penguins, they weren't a very good team. It was probably about 5 or 6 years till they started winning. So it was exciting at first, but just from what I researched, it just seemed to, have a mediocre hum-ho by the mid to end of it. Because again, remember, the city, even though it was minor league, the AHL was top level, and they were used to having a franchise competing for a title. So it really took a while until the city took hold of this. And until 1984, which was 17 years after they were in existence, that they started really selling hockey in Pittsburgh. Mario Lemieux, I can't emphasize enough how that was the dividing line between a franchise that several times looked like it was going to be gone because of financial issues. And Mario Lemieux finally was the one that fired up this team. And then they put together a very good front office, and Craig Patrick is the general manager, Bob Johnson is the coach, and Scotty Bowman was the director of player personnel. And it was at that point they started making trades that were important and becoming important. So it was, you went through almost 20 years before that franchise finally found a way to light the fans up, and they lit them up by winning.
All right, before we get to the Pens, I want to sort of sort of finish out this sort of ABA basketball story. So why did the Pipers, after such a wonderful start in their first season after winning the ABA championship, why did they move to Minnesota and leave basically the arena to the Penguins, who dutifully tanked the next year as having the NHL's worst record to boot?
Right. Basically what happened is Minnesota had a team called the Muskies. They failed. George Mikan was the commissioner, and he lived in Minnesota. They had to have a team in the city where the commissioner lived. So he basically had the team bought, moved to Minnesota. Connie Hawkins eventually was allowed to get into the NBA, so he left. A lot of the players left. They came back to the city the year after, but they were a shell of themselves. And then they tried to rebrand themselves as the Pittsburgh Condors. And it was just an embarrassing between the players, and they weren't very good at all. I mean, you basically were now putting under 1,000 people in the stadium on most nights. So they really screwed up with that. I mean, to be successful in a new league like that, you really have to win and win consistently. And I think if the Pipers were allowed to stay, they would have done that, and they would have done that to full crowds at the Civic Arena. So it was basically a dumb move by the ABA to pull out something that seemed like it was working. And as I said, when they gave back the Pipers a year later, it was a shell of itself.
All right, what's this? LinkedIn Jobs. Hey, these days it can be hard to find and hire the right candidates for your small business. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs made it easier to find the people that you want to talk to faster and for free. You can create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 770 million people. Holy mackerel. I added that part. Focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, and use screening questions to get your role in front of only the most qualified. Then use the simple tools on LinkedIn Jobs to quickly filter and prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/goodseats. That's linkedin.com/goodseats to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And now, back to our conversation. All right, well, we'll get to the Penguins now, but let me ask this kind of question, and maybe it's wrapped up in some of the stuff you're going to talk about with the Penguins. But why do you think then, after that glittering first season and obviously a bit of a rocky return, why do you think the NBA ultimately never came to Pittsburgh after that? There was no real pro basketball, aside maybe for the ABA Pittsburgh explosion back in the 2000s, right, which is much more minor league. Basketball never returned.
Yeah, and that's all we had. We had the explosion. We had the Pittsburgh Piranha, which was a CBA team. Made the CBA finals in their only year, but they didn't do it. By the point in time teams were coming back. Pittsburgh considered itself a major league town, and minor league teams really don't play well financially in major league towns. I think the NBA always questioned they would put exhibition games here after that, which never really sold very well. And I just think Pittsburgh is labeled as not a basketball town. I disagree with that. Although I think there's a difference. When the Steelers lose, they will always sell out Heinz Field. When college basketball has losing teams, they have no support. When Pitt was winning during the last decade, they would sell out their 13,000-seat arena. But if you're the NBA, that's fine to see that. But then to turn around and when Pitt has a bad year, a couple thousand people show up, I'm sure that scares people off. It's not one of the bigger markets. It's in the top 25. So there's a competition for the sports money. And if you know the Penguins are selling out, you know the Steelers are selling out. And when the Pirates win, they average about 30,000 a game. But you got to wonder, if you're the NBA, is there enough money to go around to have that kind of support when you're going to lose for a few years? So I think they have some concerns, which are justified. But the shame is that they had the NBA team in their pocket in '61 and just senselessly, they were given two opportunities to keep it, and then just two senseless decisions that cost them that franchise. And again, Bill Sharman, that turned out to be one of the better coaches in the league. So if he was leading the way and putting together the team, they could have really built that team quickly. I mean, 5 people on a court is easier to build a winner as, Milwaukee Bucks draft Lou Alcindor and win an NBA championship in their first 3 years. So that could have been something back then, and maybe they could have had that base back then. But I really think that's the fear of the NBA at this point, is it's not necessarily a large market at this point. It's still in the top 25. But, you're looking at that and you're just wondering, Pitt football has a great year this year, has trouble drawing because, there's only so much sports money to go around.
Well, that stumble, I guess, in basketball certainly played very well ultimately for the Penguins, right? Because Pittsburgh obviously became and still is a very strong hockey town. And the Penguins, frankly, just, synonymous with winter in Pittsburgh. And maybe some of the more glorious memories that sort of stuck out as you were compiling this book from that of the Penguins in the Igloo. The name certainly, the informal nickname certainly works very well for a hockey team now, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. There were, even when I was in college, and they were not a good team. There was that great moment, Mark Johnson, the famed U.S. Olympic 1980 hockey player. Pittsburgh owned his rights, and that night he debuted in a Penguin uniform. I mean, that's a goosebump evening. Hockey is a game probably out of all the sports that is just so much more special live, because TV just doesn't do it justice. The speed and of it on TV, just the way the offense flows. So, I mean, you had those great memories. And then Mario Lemieux comes in '84, and all of a sudden, one of the greatest players in the history of the game is wearing a Penguin uniform. I remember the night Paul Coffey, they traded for Paul Coffey, and just seeing him in a Penguin uniform, and finally in 1990, I'm sure you have your teams from where you're at, that one team that was always, you loved them, but they were always bad, and you never imagined them winning. And when they won the Stanley Cup, beating Minnesota 8-0 in 1991, just that emotion, still you feel that emotion when you watch a replay of it. Just you thought you'd never see this moment, and there were just so many great memories in the Mario Lemieux years, and then Sid Crosby comes towards the end of the Igloo's time and wins the Stanley Cup in 2009. I mean, just knowing what we grew up with the Penguins, and just how bad they were, and these dreams that we never thought would come to fruition, we got to see, well, now 5 times, but 3 times in the Civic Arena. I mean, it just makes everything so special. And the one thing about the Civic Arena that you don't get in the PPG Paints Arena, which is their current place, which is state-of-the-art facility, the noise was so incredibly loud in the arena. It was intimidating because of the way it was built. There was a finals game in 1991, and they had been down 2-1 at the time, and this put them up 3-2. And I just remember how incredible that was, how loud it was that night, how I couldn't even imagine the players, not getting that fired up. And but the seats, and there's a funny story there. I was so pumped up after they scored the final goal to win the game. I put my fist in the air, and the arena roof was so close to the seats that I whacked the top of the arena and thought I broke my hand. But it was just that kind of special place. It was loud. It was intimidating. On Penguin nights, there was not always an air conditioner in the place. That night was very warm outside, and there was a little mist coming off the ice because of the humidity in the place. So as I said, it wasn't always the jewel that these more current arenas are, but man, those memories were just priceless.
That's interesting that one looks at the from the outside what this structure looked like. You would think actually that this retractable roof was actually higher up and arguably would maybe kind of absorb or diminish the sound. But you're saying no, it was actually it felt kind of lower and I'm guessing it kind of bounced back pretty easily too, huh? The sound.
Now that it might have been that way early on. I mean, I was just a baby when it was built. So it might have been that way with only 12, but with 17,000 seats, you were right on the arena wall. So yeah, it was bouncing back, and it was very intimidating to opponents. I would have to think when it was full and it was loud and the base was invigorated. There was even we never had an NCAA tournament game until 1997 because the city had an amusement tax, which the NCAA didn't want to deal with, and finally the city did away with it in 1997 for the NCAA tournament. And that year, number 15 seed Coppin State upset number 2 seed South Carolina in the second game that was played that day. And again, even though Coppin State wasn't from wasn't from Pittsburgh, everybody was behind it, and the place shook that day as Coppin State was winning that game, which again, with not being a Pittsburgh team, that kind of took me by surprise hearing that, and that was pretty thrilling.
Well, clearly, lots of some Stanley Cup memories for sure, 91, 92, and 2008, 2009 near the end of its life. Let's get into, though, I want to get into some of the more, shall we say, forgotten or misunderstood teams and situations that sort of came during the process. In the 70s, of course, right? You're mentioning that the Penguins were not necessarily tearing the roof off the place, so to speak. But perhaps even more susceptible, perhaps, to the plethora of challenger leagues and challenger sports that were really starting to bubble up. Perhaps none more interesting than the Pittsburgh Triangles of World Team Tennis. Now, maybe you can kind of describe, I know there's a chapter in the book too, about the Triangles. By the way, perhaps one of the more interesting professional team names in sporting history, but for good reason. But this was a team in Pittsburgh that was well taken to, and with the roof open or not, these Triangles.
Oh yeah, I mean it was a first class league. I mean, most of the stars were playing it. We had Yvonne Goolagong was our lead women's tennis player, and she had won Wimbledon. She was one of the top players in the world, and the city fell in love with her because she was a winner here too. We had Vitas Gerulaitis as our top male star. He was just starting out at that point, but he ended up having a nice career. Unfortunately, died young of carbon monoxide poisoning, if I'm not mistaken. But the women in the city really took to him. And Ken Rosewall was the first coach who again was a Hall of Fame talent. So, I mean, you had talent here, and they were very good the first year, and the second year they ended up winning the league title. And so you had that. You had the Pittsburgh Spirit that were here, and indoor soccer was a very weird yet interesting sport. It was like a foosball table on steroids. Most games somebody had double digits in goals, and it was kind of exciting. And as I said, there was a point that the Bartolo Group, who owned the 49ers, also owned. They're from nearby Youngstown, and they also owned the Penguins and the Spirit at the time. And there was serious talk about whether or not to let go of the Penguins and just keep the Spirit in the city. So the Penguins, even though they were the top, probably the top team in the Igloo, certainly were not necessarily the most popular at the time. And the Triangles, unfortunately, kind of fizzled out a year or two later. They combined with Cleveland and just kind of fizzled out, unfortunately. And the Spirit, I believe, in the 80s, indoor soccer started kind of losing its way a little bit. But yeah, no, there were serious challenges to the Penguins' place in the city sports, and both those teams really put a challenge to them.
Yeah, let's talk about the Spirit for a second. I'm a huge fan of the old MISL, and I'm fascinated by this team because they were one of the charter franchises in the 78-79 season, and then they took a hiatus and came back in 81-82. Any particular reasons that you might know about as to why they suspended operations or why they took a brief hiatus? Because it's curious to me that they would come back in their current in the same name too, for that matter.
Well, when they came back, I mean, it was an okay team at the beginning. It wasn't necessarily one that was drawing well. Then they come back and they signed Stan Terlicki, who was one of the league's great all-time players. And they signed Paul Child, who was a great player from England, who still lives in Pittsburgh and helps with our minor league Pittsburgh Riverhounds, who happened to be one of the minor league teams that has really succeeded in the city.
And a former guest on this here podcast.
Oh, was Paul Child on it? Awesome.
Great memories. Outdoor, indoor, and certainly the Spirit for sure. Very, very high on his list of memories.
Oh, and he made it popular. People loved Paul Child. People loved Stan Terlicki. Stan Terlicki was the Wayne Gretzky of the MISL. There was a guy with New York, Steve
Jungle, the Lord of all indoors.
Steve Jungle. Exactly. He and Terlicki were the considered the two best players, and people fell in love with him here. And Paul Child certainly had a special place in with people here, and that's when they started drawing and they started becoming a successful franchise. So I think it was basically they came back and decided to take it seriously, and it started taking off at that point in time. They never won a league title, but they certainly were one of the better teams in the league.
Is it fair to say that the attraction of the Spirit, which was also in the wintertime, right, playing the same season as the Penguins, that they started to draw more attention in Pittsburgh because of, or just by happenstance, Pittsburgh Penguins, shall we say, less than stellar non-playoff run during the 80s? Well,
that was a big part of it. I mean, look, like any other city, you're going to support a winner. I mean, people want to be part of a winning thing. That's the fun of sports. As I always tell people, who get mad at the popularity of sports, who aren't necessarily sports fans. I always say when a million people come downtown to have a parade and celebrate when we get a new orchestra leader in Pittsburgh, then I'll take your argument seriously. But it's not a criticism on that, but that doesn't bring a city together. Winning teams bonds people like nobody's business. People who aren't necessarily sports fans become sports fans because they love to win. They love to be part of that atmosphere. And with the Spirit, you had both things. You had that, and you had the ability to market a superstar, a couple if you include Paul Child. The Penguins did not have that. They did not have the superstar to market. They did not have the winning to market. So I think that's where the Spirit had the advantage at the time. And again, then came Mary Lemieux, and it all changed.
Yeah, interesting. Just as they got better, the MISL started to wobble and then sort of implode into semi-oblivion and then ultimate oblivion. It's just very interesting how that sort of that symbiosis, that reverse sort of parallelism, if you will. But yes, I have plenty of friends who remember those Pittsburgh Spirit days and don't fancy themselves or didn't fancy themselves as Penguin fans at that time. And you're right. You want to see a winner, and perhaps the more competitive team at that time was the Spirit. Hey, so let's back up now, or move forward into the late 80s. You mentioned something very interesting, and we kind of brought this out in some of our earlier exploits, our conversations with in the Arena Football League. I think it's lost on folks that Pittsburgh was one of the first franchises in this fledgling Arena Football League in 1987. What memories sort of come into that, and how well received was indoor football at the time, and another groundbreaking event at the in the Igloo?
Sure, it was very well received. I was there that night. They played the first game against Washington. It was the first arena. I mean, they had played exhibition games just to kind of get their feet wet and try it out. But the first regular season game was in Pittsburgh, and there were almost 13,000 people there, if I'm not mistaken. But it was very well taken. We drew very well that first year. The first Arena Bowl was at the arena. We lost to the Denver Dynamite. But that first year, we averaged over, I think it was in the 12,000 range, which is very good for a fledgling league like that. We ended up playing in 2 Arena Bowls, but the team kind of lost a little luster after that, especially as the Penguins got hot. So I think that did affect it a little bit. And they eventually, after I think the fourth year, moved to Tampa Bay and became one of the most successful arena teams of all time. So, even though it wasn't in its current form, I mean, the franchise itself is probably the most successful franchise in the league's history. But yeah, the Buzz got off that first game, and it was fun. You know what? It was just a lot of fun.
We had Jim Foster on this show, a great two-part set of conversations, and I do remember him sort of walking us through some of those early games. To your point, the sort of trial game was in Rockford, Illinois. But it's also interesting too. I think that Pittsburgh game, if I'm not mistaken, there were two games, I guess, that kind of debuted that night, and the Pittsburgh game was the one that was not on ESPN. Does that sound right?
That I'm not sure about. It was definitely the first game that was played. I don't believe there was two simultaneous games played.
Yeah, I think what it was that the actual inaugural game was played in Pittsburgh, and then the actual first televised game was played the night after in the Rosemont Horizon, and then now the Allstate Arena in Chicago.
Yeah,
which is almost interesting in that's the most famous game that nobody saw in Arena Football League history, and you were there, Dave. That's pretty impressive.
Oh, I was there. I'm looking at the program as we speak. I have it on my wall. But it was just a fun night. It was a fun sport. It was a good game. Mike Hennessy was their quarterback, who eventually became one of the top coaches in the league. And it was just a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun that night. It was new. There was a lot of good excitement in the arena from it. And who knows, had they won that Arena Bowl game? I mean, they got beat up pretty bad in that game. But had they won that game, you never know what would have happened.
When you were at that game, did you think that it would last? I mean, the Gladiators only lasted, for about 3 seasons. But did you think it was the beginning of something long-lasting, or that it was kind of going to be a fad?
I hoped it would be long-lasting, but I probably had fad in the back of my head. I've always been amazed that it lasted as long as it did. There was such excitement, and Pittsburgh has always been a good football town, and you had hoped it would have supported more consistently. But again, a minor league team is a tough sell in a major league market, and that's eventually what it was. I mean, eventually it got hidden behind Pitt and the Steelers, and in the arena, that's when the Penguins took off.
I think it's interesting, though, that Pittsburgh continually, because of its arena, right, was always on the radar of other leagues that would sort of come around, and Pittsburgh would almost automatically kind of rise to the top group, especially for winter versions or even summer versions for that matter. I mean, the Major Indoor Lacrosse League came around just shortly thereafter. The Pittsburgh Bulls, not a long-lasting franchise there either, but and indoor lacrosse has certainly held on and is still kind of doing pretty well, especially in pockets where hockey is popular. I would think, though, that because Pittsburgh is such a strong hockey town, that lacrosse might have a little bit of a stick to it as well, but that didn't last long either, those Bulls.
No, it has a pretty good. I mean, the youth leagues are pretty good around here. It has a good following. It just, again, that minor league stigma did that. I was at the first game for them also, and the one memory I have about that is I guess you were allowed to really club people with that stick, and I just kind of remember how people were more into the violence than they actually noticed about the game. And it was just a weird evening. It was, I love college lacrosse. Robert Morris, a local university here, has a Division I team that I've gone to quite a few times, and it was just very different than the college game that I had followed. But I think they drew about 9,000 the first night, if I'm not mistaken, but it just died quickly.
Well, you also had the resurgent Penguins, right? I mean, you're hitting the
Yeah.
Stanley Cup Finals in '91 and '92, right? So that's obviously the big
Yeah.
game in town. But
Yeah. Minor league teams just really don't have a chance in a city that has successful major league franchises, and the Riverhounds have been really the lone high-level minor league team that has succeeded here, and I think that's because we have a very strong youth base in soccer in the area. I'm not sure if it's strong enough to support an MLS team. I really don't think it is, but I mean, they have a 5,000 seat stadium that they built, and they draw about 4,000 or 5,000 a night to it.
Well, even as the 90s rolled around, you had two other leagues looking at, in this case, actually the summer months, the Phantoms of Roller Hockey International, only for 1 year, another Dennis Murphy creation, and the Pittsburgh Stingers of the summertime Continental Indoor Soccer League. And this is around, again, the time before MLS had actually gotten started, or this is around sort of the World Cup time in the U.S. The Stingers actually kind of did not so bad. They were, it was a summertime kind of thing, right? So I think the CISL was a little bit of an acquired taste, I guess, was sitting indoors for 2 hours watching a soccer game during the middle of the summer. But
yeah. I mean, it was there wasn't the excitement of the Spirit. It did well, but it didn't do well financially. People at that point, you're right, it was about the Penguins, but it was nice soccer. I mean, I went to a couple games there. It was pretty good level. The Phantoms were fun. They had a couple Penguins. Brian Trottier played a game or two with them. They were owned by the Penguins. Penguin management ran it, and it was kind of fun. But again, it didn't draw terrifically well. I have the orange puck in my basement now that I had gotten at a game, and it was a minor league thing, and it did what it did, and you never got the sense that either of those teams were ever going to be anything more than a 1 or 2 year experiment.
Well, look, at the end of the day, right, an arena is a venue that has dates to fill, and whether that's sports or other events. How about on the as we sort of round third base here? What about the concert scene in this arena? Right, it seems like the acoustics were unique, I guess is probably the best word, but this was not a venue that artists didn't want to come to, right? This seemed like it was pretty well suited for all kinds of musical and theatrics, especially with that roof as a little extra variant.
Well, and see, that's where you finally have something that rivaled the Penguins. All the greats during the time came to the Civic Arena. Two very boisterous, loud, full crowds. I mean, I was there several times for Bruce Springsteen, which I'm not sure there's ever been a greater live performer in music. We had the Beatles, which was a memorable evening there. The last event at the arena was Carole King and James Taylor in a concert that was kind of thrown together at the last minute. But I mean, there you just had so many memories, and we have a nice section in the book. Lance Jones, who was worked with Tom Rooney to get the concerts books and such at the arena, does a wonderful job recapping those fabulous memories. Rich Boyer was at that last concert and just does a nice job in the book of telling you about there was another act that was supposed to be there, which I forget the name of the group at the time, but they weren't a fairly popular group. So it was kind of nice that got canceled and James Taylor and Carole King got brought in, because that was a much more appropriate way to end the Civic Arena, which was called the Mellon Arena for its last 10 years. And the great thing was the 10-year agreement with Mellon came up right before they destroyed the arena. So they renamed it the Civic Arena for that last event, which was kind of nice to do that. But Chris Fletcher does a great job telling you about Elvis Presley and the Beatles when they came there. So there are as many great concert memories that people have. The Stones, Billy Joel, Bob Seger, which was my first concert in high school. There were just so many great memories for everybody with music in the place. And it was a lot of fun. As I said, it was loud. It was a loud place, and it was very appropriate for concerts.
All right. I can't let you go without a bit about the most famous team to ever play in the arena that was never really a team. And that, of course,
the fish that say Pittsburgh.
Exactly. The Pittsburgh Pisces.
That's right.
So the memories of that movie are just sadly etched in my memory. But it's one of the stars of that film, not only Dr. J and some of those other NBA and ABA stars of yore that were sort of part of that. The arena itself really does make for a spectacular backdrop, and especially during the quote unquote climax of the film. Do you have any sort of background or understanding from the folks who wrote for you, or you've edited, or some of your stories about why Pittsburgh and why the arena for that film?
To be honest, I'm not sure why that came in. I mean, it was a great memory and a fun film. And it really showed off. You're right. I mean, it showed off the arena.
Yeah, they opened up even the roof too, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Tom Rooney was there at the time, and certainly told of the wonderful memories of getting with those stars and putting the extras in and such like that. But he never really said why they chose Pittsburgh. But I'm just happy they did. I think that was certainly one of the great memories of the arena. That, and of course, I forget the name of it. It was a Jean Van Damme movie where the Penguins actually were part of it. It was an action thriller in the 90s that I got through about 15 or 20 minutes. It wasn't a very good movie, but that was also shot at the arena. I'll have to look that up and get it back to you.
I think you're referring to Sudden Death from the mid 1985 or so. Yeah. Exactly,
Sudden Death. John Van Damme played the arena, but yeah, that's kind of a neat thing. I think we all get a little chuckle and get a little pride when we talk about that movie. That and Angels in the Outfield are probably the two Pittsburgh based movies that we all have warm feelings for when we see it.
Well, I don't know. I think Julius Erving was actually quite a decent actor in that film. Stockard Channing was in that. Flip Wilson was in that.
Meadowlark Lemon?
Yeah, Meadowlark Lemon. All kinds of fun. And occasionally you'll see that on the NBA TV cable channel. But, sadly, that's perhaps for me, at least of my generation, the biggest basketball memory that I have of Pittsburgh. I mean, no shame on me for the Pipers and the Wrens prior, but.
Yeah, I mean, it really had a great run in the 70s and 80s with the Dapper Dan round ball, as I mentioned before. I mean, anybody who was a high school star. I mean, we saw all the great stars come through. We saw Moses Malone. We saw Patrick Ewing. I mean, we saw a lot of stars come through here, and it was always sold out. And the Atlantic 10 tournament, which back then was the Eastern 8 tournament, was in Pittsburgh for 3 or 4 years when Pitt and Duquesne were both part of the, in West Virginia, were all part of the league. And that was like the place to be. It constantly sold out in the 70s and 80s until it was finally after Pitt left. It was taken to other cities because they didn't feel Duquesne alone could keep those numbers up. But it did have some great. Pitt would bring its big games in the Big East when they were in the Fitzgerald Fieldhouse. The big games, the Georgetowns, the St. John's. When they played UCLA in North Carolina, those would come to the arena too, to sold out stadiums, and the Pitt and Duquesne game would be played there and sold out. So, I mean, basketball really, even though it wasn't the pro version after the Pipers, basketball really had a nice run in the arena's history.
All right. Well, to round it out, what would you, aside from any other events perhaps that we've sort of glossed over or missed, what do you sort of think the legacy of the Igloo is? I mean, I'm also curious too, is how the Igloo got its nickname. Obviously, its look, but I mean, a stainless steel retractable roof doesn't necessarily qualify it to be an igloo per se, I guess. But
yeah. I think it was a combination of the Penguins being its major tenant and the look of it is what really brought around the name of the Igloo. And it was appropriate. I mean, it really, you look at it, that's what you think. Still today, although, I would never want it not to be called the Penguins. In the late 60s when it was named the Penguins, people wondered what the heck they were thinking. And I think that it was kind of a joke of a name at first, with the way the place looked, and it seemed just appropriate to call it the Igloo at that point. But that's really what caused it. But you just the fondness of how it ended up. I mean, its last 20 years were really probably its best. It's best in the run, and it was, although I love sitting in and being in with the amenities in the PPG arena, and certainly the Penguins have ended up selling out over 600 straight games there. You kind of miss the place. You miss the place because of the memories. You miss the place because of the character of it. It was a special place.
There was a bit of a controversy near its end when it was decided it was going to be demolished, torn down, and obviously the new PPG Paints arena nearby. It qualified for National Historic status, or it could have qualified. It seems to me like there were some efforts made, some Herculean efforts made, to kind of somehow, keep it either alive or somehow otherwise around or commemorated.
Yes.
But it kind of didn't sort of flesh out that way. Any insight as to sort of what was going on around that time, and maybe even what was conceived as being maybe uses for the stadium after it was decided it was no longer, viable for NHL use, so to speak, because of its size, et cetera?
There were thoughts. I mean, keeping a skating arena inside, but there were plans of a shopping center. There were plans of a business park within its walls. There were a lot of different angles they were trying to do to make it viable. But I mean, it was valuable property, and part of the agreement with the Penguins was for them to sign such a long lease was they would be part of the development and reap the profits of the development. And inevitably, I believe that's what caused all those historical thoughts to go away. And strangely enough, it has taken there now, 11 years later after the place closed, they're now finally getting to develop it. So that lot has been sitting there empty for 11 years. But that was the whole thing of it is just the viability of what the Penguins had envisioned for developing that area, and what the historical people did. And money is going to win out, and that's eventually what won out. on the north side of Pittsburgh is where Heinz Field and PNC Park are. When it was Three River Stadium, there was nothing over there, and it really was useless. So the Penguins or the Pirates and Steelers made an agreement that they would develop and have a piece of the development of the north side in between the stadiums. And it has grown into such a fabulous place to be now, with a casino, with restaurants, with hotels, with shopping area. And I think that's really what the Penguins wanted to take advantage of, and we're finally getting the opportunity. In fact, I think that was probably one of the things that made it so viable for the Fenway Park Group, which officially have taken over or have purchased the Penguins as of today. It still has to get NHL approval, but that should happen. But that's part of the most intriguing part of why the Fenway Group wanted it, I believe, is because of the development of the land that's about to take place there.
All right, well, let's wrap up. Here's the most important question. Given all the teams that called the Igloo home, what happens to the history of all of those teams that are no longer around, and especially those teams like the Pipers in 68, like the Triangles in 75, like the and I guess maybe even some of the other minor league teams. Where do those banners, those histories, those commemorations, those memories, where are they, if you will, enshrined, or where should they live, right? Because the Civic Center's not there anymore, and obviously the Pittsburgh Penguins probably took all their stuff with them to PPG. Where does all that other stuff live, or should it live? They
did. They're actually in PPG. They do an homage to the Hornets and the Duquesne Gardens, but they never honored those teams when they won the championships. In fact, until the Penguins won the Patrick Division title in 1991, which was their first title of any kind, there was no banners in the arena. So they never had commemorated the Pipers. They never had commemorated the Triangles within the arena. The only commemoration we have right now is in the John Hines Western Pennsylvania Sports Museum, where they have the first ABA trophy that was awarded to them there. But it should be, if all rights are all things, it should be hung in the rafters of the PPG place, because you're a street away. They virtually built PPG Arena across the street from the Civic Arena, so it's almost on the same ground. And I would love to see, and I think others would love to see, commemorations of those teams there, but they never had commemorated those, and that's a shame.
Yeah, lots of great sports memories that were not only, of course, the Penguins for sure, but they're the only ones kind of really still standing in that new arena. All the others have sort of come and gone, and there's a ton of memories there. And as well as, the music events and all the other, and the Pittsburgh Pisces, right? Arguably that should have a little bit of place somewhere too. None of that exists in a physical world. And that's a shame, because in essence, as the Igloo went, so does the memories of all these teams and leagues.
Well, and to tell you the truth, that's part of my inspiration when I write books on Pittsburgh sports is I want people to understand what the Pipers meant at the time. I want people to understand the Pittsburgh Triangle, because that was a big deal at the time. That was a real big deal at the time in the city. And I want to bring those memories back. And I we all in this book wanted to, our own little piece of the puzzle to the book. We wanted to make sure people remembered Gary Kinn with the Soviets coming in, and certainly the Rich Boyer and Chris Fletcher and Lance Jones with the concerts, Tom Rooney with the Gladiators and his great memories of that. that's a big inspiration. And I think part of that is because there isn't anything there commemorating it. I mean, I know it's a little off subject, but the reason I wrote my book on the 1955 Duquesne Dukes is because I got mad because students thought that them winning the NIT was worthless because of the way the NIT is now, and the school never promoted the fact they were actually national champions. So that's an inspiration, and to relive the Pipers, to relive the Triangles, to relive the Spirit, and make sure people understand what the Gladiators meant at the first. That is a real inspiration to me when I do these things.
All right, time to promote. Let's talk. Give us the title of this book. Tell us who it's by, because it's not just the Dave Finoli show there.
No. There's a group of us, and the majority is from my alma mater. We had a very good journalism department, so we have some good writers there, and we call ourselves the Association of Gentlemen Pittsburgh Journalists. We have a few books written by this group. The Civic Arena, Pittsburgh Civic Arena, the Three River Stadium book, which was out the year before, same kind of concept. We wrote a book called Unlucky 21, which kind of takes a different look at Pittsburgh sports. Not the best stuff, but kind of the saddest and toughest times in Pittsburgh sports, which certainly is part of the equation. So we've written those groups, and then I try to do one book myself every year. And I just released one on my favorite all-time Pittsburgh team, the 1976 national champion Pitt Panther football team, which released this past Monday. And they're done by the History Press, which is a division of Arcadia. And if you're in Western Pennsylvania, they're in all bookstores. And for everybody else, they're on Amazon.
And we will certainly highlight the almost 24 other books, right? How many are you up to now on your own?
I just started the 36, and probably of those 32 or 3 were on my own.
All right. So what's left then, Dave? What other either Pittsburgh sports stories or just books generally do you have in you? I mean, maybe I stirred up a couple of memories of a few of them, perhaps.
Well, we the group is working on a book now. We just signed a contract to write a book on, we call it Integrating Pittsburgh Sports. And so much in the integration of sports in this country occurred in Western Pennsylvania. And, we're going to take 33 chapters on that, a group of about 6 or 7. The association is going to do that. We just finished a book on, which will be out the early part of 2022. We call it the Epicenter of Pittsburgh sports. There was 3 of us that had done that one. Actually, 4 of us did that one. And that basically encompasses sports in the city between 1910 and 1960, where Forbes Field, Pitt Stadium, Duquesne Gardens, and the Fitzgerald Fieldhouse were all within 3 blocks of each other, all within walking distance of each other. And we thought it was kind of neat that literally, the day Forbes Field opened, the heavyweight champion of the world, Jack Johnson, fought at Duquesne Gardens. So fans just walked over from Forbes Field to the Duquesne Gardens to watch that. And, we thought that was an interesting thing. So we have those 2 things going now. And trust me, there's a lot in there that's still left to write about in Pittsburgh sports. I have about 5 or 6 other subjects on my little tote board to attack real soon.
Holy Finoli. What a story, and what great memories, and what a fantastic book. Again, it is a must-have if you're a Pittsburgh sports fan, or frankly just a fan, and remember, maybe your favorite indoor team would play at Pittsburgh's Civic Arena, the Igloo, perhaps the Mellon Arena. You might remember it that way. But the book is great. Again, it's called Pittsburgh's Civic Arena Stories from the Igloo. It is edited in chief by our guest this week, Dave Finoli, but it is actually authored by, officially known as, the Association of Gentlemen Pittsburgh Journalists. I love the the definition there of this group of folks. And there's just about every team and situation and event that ever happened in this arena that is mentioned and detailed in this book. Not only Dave Finoli with some great writing, but folks like Jack Matheson, Tom Rooney, Chris Fletcher, Paul Alexander, John Wadowiak. Let's see, who else? Gary Kinn, John W. Franco has some entries in there. Lance Jones with a few stories. Rich Boyer. Who else is in there? Josh Taylor, did I mention him? How about Frank Garland with a few stories? Let me see. Robert Healy III, a bunch of wrestling and boxing memories. Douglas Kavanaugh. Let's see. Who else? Just to keep on keeping on. I think that's it. I might have forgotten a few. But all those gentlemen have it's a great book. You got to get it. It's fantastic. And if you remember any of these teams, from the Pittsburgh Triangles all the way up to the Pittsburgh Penguins and everybody in between, you're going to love the book. Makes a great gift. And of course, you can find a convenient link on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode number 242 with Dave Finoli, and you'll find that convenient link to Amazon to get it in Kindle form, in paperback form, or frankly, in the fastest way that you'd like to get it. Of course, you can visit your local bookstore. Perhaps they can order it for you too. But Amazon, of course, the quickest and probably most comprehensive place to get it for yourself or as a gift for that Pittsburgh sports fan in your life. And of course, we get a couple of shekels of referral love, so we thank you for doing it that way. And let's see, you can follow Dave Finoli and his exploits. And again, he's got, I would say, over at least almost, I think about 36 or so books about Pittsburgh and sports and the various permutations of that, and more to come. You can follow him on Twitter at dfinoli. That's D as in David, Finoli, at dfinoli. And there are a whole bunch of Facebook pages devoted to the various books and teams and situations in Pittsburgh sports as well. So you can search up Dave there on multiple places on Facebook. And what else? While you're online, why don't you bookmark our website? Why don't you at goodseatsstillavailable.com? You can also send us email at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can follow us on social media as well. On Facebook, you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available. On Instagram, you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available. And on Twitter, you'll find us at Good Seats Still. Let's see. Also on the website, you'll find a link somewhere in there to send us an email address and your name so you can get on our weekly email newsletter. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. We send that out every weekend and give you a little bit of a head start of what's going to be the episode forthcoming. And what else? How about a tip of the Pittsburgh Penguins cap this week, shall we, to our pal Jerry Payne. Jerry Payne Audio Excellence. Thank you, kind sir, for all your efforts this week. And thank you, great listeners, for listening thus far. And more fun and frivolity coming your way next week. Stay tuned. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends. And until then, next week, we will see you. Bye.